Rachel Carson, a woman who inspired the environmental movement and influenced the world at large. She realized the connection between every living thing and took action when we were all facing a threat. Carson's work brought about much triumph as she worked in a time of tragedy. Overall, Rachel Carson not only set out to save nature and the animals that live in it, but most importantly, us. Rachel was born on May 27, 1907. As a child, Rachel grew up in Springdale, a small western Pennsylvania town. Carson developed a love for nature early on in her life. Soon it was time for Rachel to begin school. She was a hard worker and a dedicated student. She had a special love for reading. Carson looked forward to every new issue of the St. Nicholas magazine for children. She read the stories and imagined that someday she too would be able to write stories that made others' minds light up with color and excitement. That day came sooner than she would have thought. At age 11, Carson wrote a story about a brave Canadian pilot who saved a crew of Allied fighters and sent it to the St. Nicholas magazine for children. The editors liked it, and the story was published in the 1918 issue. Rachel had found her niche. She had decided to become a writer. Rachel grew quickly. It was time for her next big adventure. Rachel would soon leave and set out for college. Although Carson was a smart and intelligent young woman, she was very shy. Still, Rachel did well, despite trying to fit in socially. When it was time to return home from college after her first year, Carson welcomed the summer warmly, at first. But soon her emotions turned to sadness, and inside Carson felt worried. A putrid smell lingered in the air, and smoke was blotched across the sky in large puffs. The rivers were dirty and polluted, and the much-needed forests were being cut down to build more factories and houses. The environment was in bad shape, and Carson had serious concerns. When Rachel returned to college, she started to take a biology class. The teacher of the class was the lively Miss Mary Scott Skinner. In Miss Skinner's class, Carson looked through the microscope and saw the small yet amazing world in one drop of water for the first time. Rachel fell in love. Now Carson made up her mind to become a biologist. This opened up a whole new world of possibilities, but also problems for Rachel. How would she find a way to pay for graduate school? But Carson worked hard and earned a full scholarship to Johns Hopkins University. Carson received her master's degree in biology. She was one of the only women in her class to do so. Unfortunately for Rachel, she graduated at the peak of the Great Depression, a time of massive unemployment. No one wanted to hire women biologists, much less now. There were no job offers and nothing was open. Carson started to write professionally. She released a book called Under the Sea Wind that was not well received by the public. World War II had just begun and no one wanted to read a book about the ocean. But Carson continued to write and research. Something was wrong. There were disturbing damages to the web of life. All around Rachel, the voices of nature were going silent. So Carson watched closely, listened carefully, and learned as much as she could about what was going on. She realized that the chemical industry in the United States had become quite powerful. People wanted to kill bugs and other pests that ate their crops, bothered them, and sometimes even made them sick. Soon, a Swiss chemist, Paul Hermann Mueller, found a solution. While experimenting with chemicals for chemical warfare, DDT, or dichloryl diphenyl trichloroethane, developed as an insecticide, was originally created in 1874. In 1939, DDT was put into action after essentially sitting on a shelf in a lab for 35 years. DDT was used in the second half of World War II to combat malaria, typhus, lice, and other insects that carry diseases. After the war, DDT was sold by a company called DuPont. Even though scientists and some people questioned its safeness, the U.S. government used it to control pests, and farmers used it to kill insects and rodents that ruined their crops. There was no immediate impact on humans or nature, so DDT was assumed safe. We were quickly trying to be in control of nature. Instead of living with it and adapting safely, these chemicals were very poisonous, but were used in huge amounts everywhere because people thought they were safe. We were slowly killing the world around us. It was a tragedy. The insecticides were poisonous to birds, insects, fish, and other animals the whole way around the web of life. Not only that, but we now know today that the main chemical used, DDT, can cause vomiting, tremors, shakiness, and seizures in humans. It can also cause problems with the liver and reproduction. DDT is considered a possible human carcinogen, which means it's capable of causing cancer in living tissue. Rachel realized all of this and decided that others needed informed about this tragedy that affects us all and one day could affect the world as we know it. In Carson's book, Silent Spring, written so everyday people could understand this tragedy, she outlines what was happening in nature. Chickens had no chicks hatch. Many farmers had trouble raising pigs and cows. Apple trees bloomed, but no bees buzzed and pollinated, so there was no fruit. And humans, there were many sudden deaths of all ages that doctors could not explain. Birds that ate worms affected with DDT from the frequent sprayings were becoming silent and dying. Powder that had been sprayed out of a plane like sifting sugar weeks before could be seen on the ground. No evil force had brought this upon this turning silent world. As Carson says in her book, quote, "The people had done it themselves," unquote. The spring and the voices of nature were fading, hence Silent Spring. Rachel researched, questioned, wrote, and rewrote. She battled on even as she was diagnosed with breast cancer in 1960. Finally, after writing and rewriting, Silent Spring was published in 1962. It created a huge ruckus, and the damages to nature were as bad as ever. After DDT began to be used, a vicious cycle started. The insects exposed to DDT became immune to it, therefore forcing people to create stronger, more dangerous chemicals to combat the slowly rising insect empire, as it is outlined in Carson's book. Some people agreed that we needed a change. Others passionately disagreed and went against Rachel. Carson was criticized harshly. People thought her points were invalid because she was a woman. These chemicals were solving problems, so what could be wrong with them? But Rachel continued to stand up for what she believed. Soon, President Kennedy took notice and asked Rachel to come to Washington, D.C. to defend her book and its ideas. Though she was scared and weak from the cancer, Carson went. Soon, because of Rachel's book and her testimony in D.C., investigations started and new laws to protect nature were passed. Sadly, Rachel did not live to see all of the change and triumph her book and research brought about. On April 14, 1964, 2 years after Silent Spring was published, the woman who changed the world's point of view on nature forever passed away. Without Rachel's book and her love and passion for nature, things like the environmental movement, Earth Day, the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, might have been long delayed or never developed at all. The biggest triumph yet. On January 31, 1972, DDT was banned in the United States. Everything Carson did was a great triumph for the Earth. We all need to take her words into consideration today. What could have been a bigger tragedy than it turned out to be was saved by Rachel and her triumph of a book and research in a whole. As Rachel says, quote, "In nature, nothing exists alone," end quote. What we do matters because we can send everything spiraling downwards into a tragedy, or like Carson, take a little time to care about others and inspire a triumph of a turnaround.